I'll be a little bit curious. I'm going to take a show of hands here. How many of you are undergoing the promotion or tenure or both process this year, so that you're expecting by the end of this academic year to hear whether you had success or not? Okay. And how many are anticipating the process beginning this year, which I'll talk about the details, but preparing your CV and statement, having the department say, let's do it, and then the review would happen in earnest next year? Okay. Wow, that's like the first time I've ever had a completely uniform audience before. But that's great. So this is the right timing. This is not necessarily the right title, because the process will culminate in a tenure or promotion decision in June of 2016 for all of you. I'm going to give you just an overview of the promotion and tenure process and how it plays out here at the university. I'll spend a fair bit of time on the things that you as a candidate will need to put forward. And because of that, the fact that you're all at this stage is excellent, because otherwise this advice would have been much more useful to you last year. I'll talk as well about some departmental responsibilities. There may be some department heads here who are making sure they're up to speed on things. We have some, Judith Baskett, Associate Dean for CAS is here, for example. So we have various others that will be involved as well. I will spend a fair bit of time talking about things that you can pay attention to up front that will make it so that your file does not have an issue that can complicate the review. And then throughout, don't wait for the end. If you have questions, please interrupt and ask, okay? My first question is, how did the transitions get back in my presentation after I took them out? Okay. Starting next term is when the process will really begin for you. Your department head is expected to notify faculty who are required to undergo review. That would be people whose contracts require a tenure decision by June of 2016. For those of you that are here, you would be notified, hey, we need to start the process. People for whom a tenure decision is available but not required by contract, that would be if you had some credit for prior service and you haven't determined whether or not you're going to use it all. I think the bargaining agreement is not clear about how this would work, but I imagine your department head will talk to you, and if not, you might want to talk to your department head about the timing. If you're a candidate for promotion to full professor, that's the other survey I should do. How many of you are looking at promotion and tenure, so going from assistant to associate professor with tenure? And how many are looking at promotion from associate to full professor? Okay, so I'll have less to say for you, but some. But the one thing I'll say is your department head may or may not be telling you in the winter term, hey, you're eligible to be promoted to full professor, because that's an elective promotion. It's not contractually required. Clearly, you're aware of the opportunity since you're here. During the winter and then into the spring term, there will be things that you need to do, and I will be showing you what those things are. And one of those things will be helping your department identify appropriate external reviewers for your file. And then in the spring term and on into the summer, your department will be recruiting those external reviews. On into the fall, once the full package is together, the department will vote. Most departments have a personnel committee, a smaller subset of the department. Not all, but most do. They will have a discussion. They will vote and prepare a report for the department. The full department will then come together to discuss the case. They will have a vote by signed secret ballot. And those ballots go to the department head, who then will prepare a recommendation and report, either supporting or not supporting the proposed promotion. That will move forward as files are completed to the dean's level. Judith Baskin tells me CAS has already seen some promotion files coming through, so that's great. That means things are moving ahead. Each school or college has an advisory committee for the dean, with the exception of the Clark Honors College. They recruit the CAS Dean's Advisory Committee for their cases. That advisory committee will consider, it's the elected faculty committee, I should mention that, I think, will consider everything in the file to that point. They will make a recommendation based on their vote. There's no expectation that they'll be unanimous. They each cast their vote of either strongly supporting, or different colleges have different vote structures, but basically each member of the committee will either support or not support the proposed promotion. That advice then goes to the dean. You start to get a sense of hierarchical layer of onion, sort of successive reviews. That's how the system works. Everything goes to the dean. The dean will make his or her personal evaluation of the case, write a report, and prepare a recommendation. Those things are happening aggressively, we hope, now, and will continue on into the winter term. The deans have deadlines for submission of things that they're aware of. I don't think I will talk about the details of those. Then into the winter term, a little bit now, even in the fall term, and on into the spring term, those files will come to academic affairs. Once I receive those files, I take a careful scrutiny to make sure everything is in order. I try to anticipate any remaining questions that additional reviewers might have and ask the deans, if necessary, to address those questions. And then release the case to the Faculty Personnel Committee. It's the university-level Faculty Personnel Committee, a committee I hope some of you will consider serving on it someday in the future. Terrific opportunity to see how the university works, to see how superb our faculty are beyond your own discipline. I'm a chemist. I know the chemists are good. I love seeing how good everybody else is as well. FPC is an opportunity for you to explore that excellence. This is an elected committee of 12 faculty. They prepare a vote or a recommendation and a vote, which goes to the provost. And then the provost is the only person in this whole series that actually makes a decision. Everybody else is providing guidance and advice. The provost makes a decision. Decisions are announced on May 1st, if at all possible. They used to be announced at a rolling date as the file was completed. Somebody would be notified, they'd be happy and relax. And then their close friend in the same department would be not happy and not relaxed because months would go by without having heard. And the word on the street was the longer the process takes, the more in trouble you are. Well, you know what? We're going to have almost 60 cases this year. We can't do them all at the same time. So maybe the fact that your colleague hadn't heard was because we hadn't gotten to the case yet. That was usually what was happening, in fact. But the provost a number of years ago, recognizing the stress that was involved with these rolling decisions, said, look, let's pick a date. And we started at the end of May and moved it up to the beginning of May, which puts a lot of pressure on everybody but the candidates. And that's the most important thing. So now on May 1st or earlier, if the May 1st is on a weekend, everybody hears, and there's no stress about whether you were hearing late because of bad reasons or not. What do we expect? Most of you are tenure considerations, and my comments are going to be focused on tenure, but promotion to full professor, you've been through this, and you can apply this to your situation as well. Basically, what we're looking for is a record of accomplishment that suggests that we would like to offer you the opportunity to be our colleagues for the rest of your life. So we're looking at what you've accomplished, and particularly we're looking at what you've accomplished in the perspective of what we can predict you're going to continue to accomplish. So I'm going to use the word trajectory everywhere except here. But trajectory is the key word. We're looking not just at what you've done, but importantly and more importantly, at what you're going to do. Regarding promotion and tenure here at the University of Oregon, we have high expectations. We're a very high research activity, Carnegie classification, AAU institution, committed to research and teaching, and we expect a lot. That said, most of our candidates are successful. And I personally have a number of beliefs in as to why that's the case. I think we hire very well. I think we have a pre-tenure process that is supportive and provides information about expectations so that there really should be no surprises at the end. I think we have a growing mentorship program, particularly in some units that I hope to help facilitate throughout the university as appropriate. Bottom line is we hire good people and they become even better as they're here, and it's no surprise that we have a high success rate, even though we have high expectations. In a typical year, if we had maybe 30 reviews for tenure, it wouldn't be an unusual year if everybody was successful. It wouldn't be unusual if we had one or two unsuccessful as well, but primarily we see success. So if you're stressed, that's okay. I was hired here with a lot of credit for prior service. I didn't think that the university was in the business of bringing people in to dash their hopes a year later, but I was stressed. You will be. It's a stressful process. I hope I'm able to give you clarity today about how things play out, to give you confidence in recognizing the strengths of your own case and placing that in the perspective of how stressed you might want to be. Here's the word trajectory again. Okay, we're looking at accomplishments in these three areas of scholarship, teaching, and service, and seeing where you're going to go. Start to drill into a little bit more detail. Research is typically the word we use, but I think we're good at this university of recognizing that different fields have different types of scholarship for which research might not be the best term. So creative practice or scholarship in general. We're looking for a reputation for creating new knowledge. And I put inter in parentheses here to try to distinguish perhaps between the tenure and promotion to associate professor and promotion to full. Maybe a candidate for tenure and associate professorship would have established a national reputation. Perhaps a candidate for professor to full professor would have moved on to develop an international reputation. Rules of thumb, not hard and fast requirements. In teaching, we're looking for excellence at both the undergraduate and, as appropriate, if you have a graduate program, and most of you do, teaching at the graduate level as well. Service, we want to see that you care about your institution, about your department, about your professional community. Drilling still a little bit further, there are some rules on the street, rules of thumb about how tenure and promotion might work. I want to kind of disenfranchise some of those street rules a little bit, but certainly we're looking for excellence in the area of research or scholarship or creative practice. We want you to ideally clear the hurdle for, or the expectations for accomplishment in this area handily, clearly meeting or exceeding those criteria in terms of both the quality and impact of your work and the quantity. In every department in which particularly, say, publication is an expectation for promotion or tenure, or in those fields for which creative practice is an expectation, we always talk about the importance of quality and impact, but we can't neglect quantity as well. And so you all, not sure if it's in here or not, you should each have available to you your approved departmental criteria for promotion and tenure. Make sure you've studied those carefully. Ideally many years ago, but if not, it's not too late to look at them now. And as those policies and statements were created, we all engaged in discussions with departments about both quality and quantity. And for a department that would say quality is more important than quantity, I would ask them to consider at what line that was not completely true. In other words, would a single superbly written, well-received paper be sufficient? Or are you in a field where publication is a higher level of publication is expected regardless of the quality? Okay, so review your departmental guidelines. Make sure you're very familiar with them. We similarly want to see excellence in teaching. We can't all be superb, but we want to see that you are clearly committed to and doing very well in the teaching arena. Service always ends up the bottom of the three, but very important. We are not interested in people who are unwilling to recognize that they've chosen to carry out their careers in an institution in which we all need to work together in a number of areas. including service in support of our department and our institution. Please. Yes. I'm going to repeat your question in part for the recording. The question is, could I talk a little bit more about service expectations? And yes, I can. I'll have a little bit more later into the talk. But there is a sense that assistant professors should be sheltered from over-engagement in the service arena. And in fact, my next slide is going to say we don't offer tenure for people who excel at service to the expense of their teaching or scholarship. So an assistant professor, the service spectrum typically is pretty focused on the department. Although it's not surprising to see some professional service reviewing of manuscripts and grant proposals, for example, maybe some participation in regional or national meetings beyond simply being a speaker. But everybody's individual. It's looking for some level of appropriate engagement. For a full professor, we're expecting a more substantial engagement. Provost Bean, when he was our provost, used to describe, again, trying to give a sense of the difference between the initial promotion and promotion to full professor, but without writing hard and fast rules. If we expected to see maybe committee membership for an assistant professor, perhaps we'd like to see an associate professor candidate for promotion to full serving as a chair of a committee. Editorial board membership versus the chair of an editorial board. Conference organization, there's something of a qualitative sense of difference between the service expectations for a full professor and for an associate professor. But again, to reiterate, for an assistant professor, it is not at all uncommon for the service to be focused pretty extensively at the department level. I always end up putting in plugs for the University Senate. It is our elected representative body for the university. We've all heard a lot about Senate's activities over the time we've been here. The Senate works if everybody's engaged with it. Some departments, Department of Mathematics, typically encourages its assistant professors to run for election to the University Senate. When I was an assistant professor, my department had put me on the slate of candidates for the University Senate, and I had so many of my tenured colleagues come to talk to me. This was at a different institution, if I didn't say that. So many people expressed grave concern about my being interested in Senate service that I campaigned not to be elected, and I successfully lost. I don't like that. People that are interested in how this university functions, who want to help out, I think we need to encourage them. We need to help them be realistic and not overly engage in service. But, the Senate meets typically once a month for a couple hours, and there's probably some documents that you want to read and familiarize yourself with beforehand. But Senate service does not have to be something that eats up your entire working day every day. So I encourage you to look beyond your department as appropriate. Touch base with your departmental colleagues. Make sure they're not going to be gravely concerned, as mine were, about a service responsibility. But take on things that are interesting and important to you. All right? We don't want to see any of our faculty cross the bar and just barely squeak into tenure. We love to see everyone pass with that, making a decision so easy for the provost that it's a genuine pleasure. And the vast majority of cases, I would say that is the case. That said, we maybe want to define the lower edge of what we're looking for, so clearing the bar or the hurdle as the analogy we use. I already mentioned this, that superb service will not compensate for below expectations in the research and teaching sectors. It'll make us feel a little bad about having to say goodbye to someone who is clearly interested in helping the university function, but in the end, it's the scholarship and teaching that have to be excellent, and the service supports those efforts. If the research and teaching are not to expectations, we don't promote or we don't tenure. I don't see that very often for the reasons I've talked about already. What if you're not? Another question, yes?
So, I mean, is that determined primarily through evaluation only, or people as a whole
Yeah, the question is how do we evaluate excellence in teaching? We have what would be deficient in teaching in particular. We have quantitative evaluations of students that are a significant piece of the evaluation, but not the only piece. If there was a consistent spectrum of below average teaching performance, that would be problematic. What the signed written student comments have to say, even more so, if they present a consistent picture of concern about a faculty member, that's going to be a concern. We have peer evaluation of teaching. It's an independent measure by your colleagues rather than by the students. It's not unusual for colleagues to have a different opinion of the teaching than the students. They're in very different settings. A colleague can recognize pedagogical approaches, innovations. Students might not like being guinea pigs in an innovation. The first year of a flipped classroom approach or something like that, you could end up with having the students very unhappy, even though your colleagues are thinking that you're one of the world's innovators in education. So these pieces come together. I would say those are the two big pieces. Teaching is evinced in other platforms as well. Your spectrum of professional speaking engagements. You know, someone who does not do a good job of making a presentation typically doesn't get repeatedly invited to speak at national conferences, for example. Judith, I think, was going to... Oh, about enrollments. You know, I don't know that I have a firm piece of guidance on that. I guess if a faculty member were offering courses that were regularly being canceled because of lack of student interest, that could be an interesting observation. I personally would need a lot more information about the events to try to conclude what was happening. Was it a lack of student interest because this faculty member is known to be the worst teacher on earth? Or is it because... Yeah. Yeah, so that, again, for the people listening later, the question is a follow-up about courses that might be offered in fields that are not of high popularity amongst the students or in a growing sort of sense. You have the opportunity in your statement, the department head has the opportunity in his or her report as well to establish the conditions under which the teaching is occurring. And if you're enrolling 6 students in a course, but 3 years ago the course didn't exist, and then there was 1 student, the sense of growth, placement of your teaching, what you're teaching in the spectrum of what is offered by the department or university, and establishing its importance. I think there's no. I can't look at a single data piece and conclude anything about a teaching portfolio, but it's the aggregate, I think, that builds the story.
The committees, if there are weak evaluations, particularly perhaps in the initial years, the committees really want to see that the individual took advantage of the teaching effectiveness program.
Thank you.
That somebody made an effort. Not everyone has the same degree of charisma, but the teaching effectiveness program is extremely effective in all the kinds of things that it does, including videotaping your classes and talking about strategies for different kinds of courses. So if someone has consistently below average evaluations for their unit and they did not take advantage of the CEP, then the committee would want to know why not. So definitely take advantage of that option. And as far as low enrollments, at least in the College of Arts and Sciences, there are many courses that have low enrollments set to higher level. Let's say a Greek text course, you have to know classical Greek, or advanced language courses. Ideally, a department head would give somebody a range of courses including larger courses that would be of greater interest, as well as the smaller seminars in the sub area. So if one is consistently not just having small little courses in a very small sub area, talk to the head and say, I can certainly do a larger survey course on in a more general area. So be proactive if you feel you're not getting a range of courses coming.
And I'm gonna repeat what Judah said in about 10 words. One is the teaching effectiveness program is available. I always am a big fan of it, and I'll tell you the review committees are as well. Whereas I see very few cases where I would look at the teaching portfolio and say, this person really hasn't been a very successful teacher. I'll tell you that in those cases where someone could be better, committees are deeply respectful of someone a candidate who recognizes that he or she could be better and tries to change. Even if that attempt in the end is unsuccessful, the engagement with something like teaching effectiveness program shows a commitment to your teaching, and that's really important, both to you as a candidate and to the reviewers of your case. And with regards to enrollment, yes, all of you are about to come up for promotion. It's a little bit late to plot the course appropriately, but hopefully you all had department heads who recognize the value of having you engage in a variety of teaching environments, small classes and large, and gave you the opportunity to experience both of those. Another question? Okay, the question was from someone who is, given circumstances in the department, has had teaching focused at the lower division, hasn't had the chance to do much upper division teaching. Now, the review committees won't hold that against you. You might, I imagine you've already expressed your opinion. It is good to have the opportunity to teach across the spectrum of courses. We recognize that individual circumstances can be such that whereas that's a nice thought, the reality is we need you here, please. The last point here, we don't see this often, okay? So I don't want to dwell on it. But if you're doing the high jump analogy too long and say that you left the bar quivering from both the research and teaching, these are the cases that take the most consideration, the most attempt, the ability to see into the future. Again, we're trying to predict trajectory, and you're looking and saying, I'm not sure about either of the things that makes me know that we should keep this person here. These are the cases that keep the provost awake at night. Okay. As you move into this process, again, primarily starting next term, for those of you that'll, that was all of you who are going to be looking at promotion by June of 2016, you'll be asked to sign a waiver or non-waiver letter. I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. You'll need to prepare your curriculum vitae, signed and dated. I'll talk a lot more about the vitae and what it might contain. It's important that it be dated before it goes to the external reviewers so that everybody looking at the file later knows what the external reviewers looked at. You can update it. I think I've got this in here, but I'll say it right now because I'm thinking of it. You can update your CV at any time up until the provost writes to you and says, congratulations. If you send an update of a 30-page CV every couple of weeks, your file gets really thick, and people don't know quite how to interpret it. So we urge you, if you provide an update, to make it an update. If a manuscript was in preparation and it's now in press, make a note that the manuscript 13 on page 7 is now in press. And sign and date that single page instead of providing the whole new thing. I call it the Where's Waldo effect, which isn't quite the right analogy, but you get the idea that the review committee is looking at two 30-page documents trying to figure out what's different. Make it easy for them. You'll provide a statement. I'll talk quite a bit more about that as well. And you'll provide suggestions regarding external reviewers. I don't have a lot more about that, I don't believe, in this case. You know your field better than anybody else in the world. You know the people who would be exceptionally good at evaluating your accomplishments. You may know the people that would be uniquely bad. for whatever reasons. Maybe you published what they were planning to publish and they hate you. Don't assume anybody else knows that. So you will provide a list of suggested reviewers to your department head. You can also provide a list of people that you really think should not be used to review your case. If that list is every specialist in your field, your department head will probably have to use some of them anyhow. So choose wisely, of course. The department will independently develop a list of reviewers that they think would be good to look at your case. They might understand your field really well and pick the same people you suggested. They might be looking at a broader, more general level and pick people that you might think, well, sure, that's a perfect choice, although he probably doesn't understand this particular field quite as well. If you suggest somebody that the department has also independently come up with, that reviewer is not tainted by being listed as suggested by the candidate. It's only the ones that you suggest that the department head did not think of that are listed as suggested by you. And we expect, say, if there are 6 letters, we only want at most a couple that were suggested by the candidate. We need a clear majority that were not suggested solely by you. So to help your department, don't suggest everybody in your field, because then they can't find anybody that would be appropriate. You pick them all. Okay. Well, that's not quite true if they do it independently. But what I always suggested, and I worked at the National Science Foundation for years and was telling people how to suggest reviewers for proposals as well, I'd say pick the people that someone knowledgeable but not a specialist in your field wouldn't. You know the best people. Figure that your colleagues will be able to figure out the best people that are well known, and you do a Google search for your field of research and the top 5 hits are this person. They're going to figure that one out. Help them find the people that would be really good that they might not think of. Question?
How does the differences in institutions affect the institutions for your reviewers? So Harvard has extremely high expectations for tenure. Does that kind of get taken into account when you ask for a review from Harvard?
Yes, the question is, what about the institution to which a reviewer is at? Should you suggest somebody at Harvard, knowing that a reviewer from Harvard may have particular expectations that may or may not coincide with ours? I think you need to pick the best people. They will be provided with our departmental criteria for promotion and tenure. They will be asked to evaluate you under those criteria. Over the past many years, the letter to the external reviewers has asked the question, do you think this candidate would get tenure at your institution? Some people have objected to that question as irrelevant. It's a piece of guidance, and I'm embarrassed. I rewrote the letter to the external reviewers, and I'm forgetting the exact language that I used for it. I don't want us to ask the reviewers, should we give this person tenure? Because that in the end is our decision. We're asking them for guidance, for advice, for opinions about the scholarship in particular. And we take all of it in, but we get to make the decision. So the external reviewer, I don't really think they should tell us, this person should get tenure at the University of Oregon. They oftentimes do. You can tell external reviewers whatever you want, but in the end, they will respond in the way that they are comfortable responding to a request to evaluate somebody. They may say, would be a slam dunk for tenure at our institution. You'd be an idiot to turn her down. They may say, I'm at Harvard, we don't tenure anybody, but we should, and we would. We'd be making a mistake if we didn't tenure this person. You get all sorts of different responses. It kind of doesn't matter what you tell the reviewers, they will respond the way that they are comfortable responding. But as we read these evaluations, we have our internal filters as well. So if a Harvard reviewer doesn't say anything except we wouldn't offer tenure to this person, then our review committees internally would look at that and say, well, that's no big surprise. Harvard doesn't tenure anybody. Yeah. How do we determine whether a reviewer is appropriate or not, or based on perhaps conflict of interest considerations? I like to use the federal government guidelines for conflict of interest. I figure if it's good enough for the NSF handing out millions of dollars of government grants, it's probably good enough for us looking at these sorts of reviews. NSF has a lifetime prohibition on review by a mentor or a mentee. So if someone coming up for, if you're thinking about suggesting your PhD mentor, you shouldn't, okay? I guess probably very few of you are going to be recommending one of your students as a letter writer for you at this point, but don't. We should never put them in that position. Co-authors or co-PIs on a grant. NSF says 5 years. So if you were a co-author more than 5 years ago, it's good enough for the NSF. I think that's probably good enough for us too, okay? Those are the formal sorts of things. If it's a spouse or a partner or a family member or a close business relationship and so on, those would be disqualifying conflicts. The fuzzier ones become the people that don't fall out of those things, but you're just not sure. You can ask your department head, you can ask a dean, you can ask me about specific relationships, and we can just make a determination. For me, again, at the NSF, with the federal government, that was generally based on the question, could this person, and sometimes I would address it to the prospective reviewer, but we're probably not going to do that here, could this person feel comfortable making an unbiased evaluation and recommendation, or is there something about the relationship that would make it difficult for that person to be fully honest? If so, then we shouldn't put that person in that position. Okay? Was there another question? Yes? If the prospective reviewer is a professor for you at an undergraduate class, that starts to seem like kind of a long time ago. But it's one of those ones where sometimes I see review committees feeling a little nervous about it. So think about I hate this buzzword, but I'll use it, the optics. How does it look? And if a reasonable person might think, gosh, I'm just not sure, then maybe it's best to find somebody else. I was working at NSF. I would occasionally get lists of reviewers, and I'd say, gosh, I don't recognize any of these people. Maybe that's okay because I'm not a specialist in this field, but I don't know any of them. So I'd get suspicious, and I'd look up and I'd say, well, this person looks good. I just never heard of him. This one, oh, there's a published CV, and I'd figure out that it was a classmate of the proposal PI at the same time in the same institution. I'd say, you know what? They were drinking buddies. I don't feel comfortable with that one. And then you find another one, and in the extreme you'd say, I can't trust any of these because it's pretty clear the person was trying to pick people that were friends. And an interesting corollary of that is that people may know who their friends are, but friends and professional relations are very different things. I saw many friends suggest that I should not fund a proposal because it was flawed. So people that tried to engineer an outcome were probably wasting their time. You want to pick the best people in your field to evaluate. That's really the bottom line. Other things that you'll have to provide for your department, who in turn will provide them either to the external reviewers or to the internal review committees, you want to get them a complete portfolio of the publications or other products that you created as part of your independent career. In my field, I did a PhD and a postdoc. My independent career started as an assistant professor, and so everything I published as an assistant professor up to the tenure decision was what I wanted people to look at. The earlier stuff is nice. That's why they hired me, but that's long ago. What we're looking at is the material you've created in your position. If you have things in press, document that. That's important for people to see. Remember the word trajectory. Well, things that are in the pipeline are a key piece of that trajectory. A teaching portfolio is optional but common. We encourage that to be a representative set of materials to illustrate your innovations or creations in the teaching environment. A portfolio for a class you're particularly proud of, a really creative final examination, student product or student projects that as part of a course, things that make you particularly proud of your teaching, not every syllabus and every exam that you've provided. My, my reading of the collective bargaining agreement is that it does not require a teaching portfolio. But I think you ought to provide one. I would strongly urge everybody to put one together. You pay attention to your department's expectations. If they're encouraging you, saying, you know, what would be really helpful to us is just to see these sorts of materials. Their opinion counts. Okay. I'm going to ask Gina to jump in too. Okay. I think we'll all want to take one more look at the CBA, but again, my read is that a teaching portfolio is not a requirement. So yes, the promotion to full FAO is exactly the same set of expectations. Yeah, if a dean would like to see one, I suppose that's nice. And again, I would strongly urge everybody to do this. The teaching piece is an important piece, a critical element of the evaluation for tenure or promotion. And having the opportunity to do more than write a page or two about it in your statement seems like a good opportunity to me. But if you say, I'm too busy, I really don't want to do it, I think the CBA would support you and say you don't have to. So what could a teaching portfolio look like if you feel like, I'm gonna overinterpret what you said. If your teaching portfolio is mainstream. Yeah, okay, so how do you document what you've done? Well, it's, if let's pick the flipped classroom as an example, presumably to do that, you've had to do something. You've let the students know you've done it. Maybe you've actually put all your lectures on video and they're available through Blackboard. You could, if that's the case, you could put in I don't know if you can get through the Blackboard security interface or not, but you could try to put a web address up for someone who could actually look at your online lectures, or you could simply say that they're available, but they're in Blackboard and the security, you haven't figured out how to let them look at them, but trust me, they're there. So I think there are ways that you can document what you've done. You don't, at the end of the term, you don't have something that looks like a traditional class. You've got the pieces of it that you can highlight what you've done. Yes? Yeah, the question is what about those things you get, the notes of thanks from students or letters or commendations, whatever else might come in. Are those appropriate or not? I think they're entirely appropriate. I address those when I talk about the service portfolio, which is coming up here in a minute. And interestingly, it is required, not optional under the CBA. When people worried about that, I said, look, I keep a drawer on my desk, and when I get letters like this, I read them and feel good, and I put them in my feel-good drawer. And then if it were time for something like this, I would sift through, and the ones that supported my teaching, I'd provide those in my teaching portfolio. Here is what I have heard unsolicited from the recipients of my teaching efforts, or my service things. The little certificate I got for being an Intel Science Fair judge last year. I'm not going to frame that certificate and put it on my wall, but it goes in my drawer, and if I were ever creating a service portfolio, that's a document that shows something that I did. Okay. So the service portfolio, I guess I just kind of covered that. Again, it's required. What do I put in it? There's guidance provided on the Academic Affairs CBA implementation page, and I think I've got an address for that coming up later in the presentation. But it's just this: evidence, documentation of the sorts of things you've done beyond your research and your teaching. And it doesn't mean they're divorced from it. You may give a lecture to Eugene City Club or the Rotary Club about what you do. That's a teaching opportunity. It supports your research and the impact it's having. And it's a service thing because you've done something for that group, particularly wonderful something, so you've brought things that are happening at the university to their attention. So when they write you to thank you for doing that, put it in your drawer and then put it in your service portfolio. It's a typical P&T portfolio. The candidate will sometimes list all the journals they've reviewed journal articles for, and the granting agencies that they've reviewed proposals for. Maybe they'll put the numbers. So I reviewed 17 papers for the Journal of the American Chemical Society, 5 NSF proposals, and so on. And we're not looking, give us access to your Outlook calendar so we can see that you actually did all those things. There is a level of trust involved here. But those are service pieces that you should identify.
And presumably there are emails inviting you to do that, and email links or things on evaluation. Yeah, you can print them out and then
Okay, Judith says you could print those things out. You could. I trust you. I personally, yeah, it depends. I just looked at a colleague's case who's reviewed 125 manuscripts over the last 4 years. I don't want 125 pages of emails thanking him for doing those things. Oh, I think the confusion about mentioning grants under service, I think I either misspoke or spoke too quietly. If you're reviewing grant proposals for a funding agency, that would be a service contribution. If you're submitting proposals, absolutely, that's a research component. It is service on an undergrad or thesis committee or a graduate thesis committee, graduate student, so on. Is it service or teaching? I think it's both. You'll be guided as to where to list. In particular, there will be a listing in the teaching section of the portfolio, all the graduate student committees and undergraduate committees on which you may have served, students you may have mentored. So we typically place them in the teaching component, but yet, say me, a research active chemistry professor, if I listed my doctoral students under teaching only, it would be kind of odd because I work with doctoral students in support of their research development in support of my research program. So sometimes it's not easy to figure out where something belongs. When I wrote my statement, I work on international curriculum development for green chemistry. Is it teaching? I think so. I teach teachers how to do this stuff. Is it service? Well, the school districts that I work with seem to think so. Is it research? Well, none of the stuff I'm providing to them is canned and off the shelf. I've had to develop things. So it's really all three. And I make sure my colleagues know that. That's a good question. Who sees what? What do the external reviewers see in particular? External reviewers will get a copy of the P&T criteria statement for your department. They'll get your CV. They'll get your statement in which you discuss in your own words your research or scholarship, teaching, and service. They get your scholarship portfolio. Okay. They will not get your service portfolio. There have been some units, I think, that have provided more comprehensive portfolios. There are some disciplinary nuances to all this that I don't want to be hard and fast right here. But typically what they're going to see is what I just mentioned. So you can go ahead and brag in your service portfolio and they won't see that. The waiver. This relates to how much of your file you get to see if you want to see it. A P&T dossier is considered part of a personnel file. Public law in the state of Oregon says as an employee has access to materials in the personnel file. The waiver addresses the reviewers in particular. Before your file goes out for review, maybe some of you, probably some of you, well, maybe not if you're pre-tenure, have gotten a package to review. With that, or maybe you've gotten one from a granting agency for that matter, they tell you your review will be confidential, will not be revealed to the PI. We can't tell our reviewers that unless you've told us that's okay with you. Okay? So if you say your file is entirely closed, that means that you are not going to ask for access and you're not going to get access to the letters written by reviewers of your case. An alternative is, and this is default under state law, if you do not waive access to your file, you have access to your file. You can read the letters from the external reviewers, you can read the internal committee reports, anything else that's in there is open to you. And there's intermediate ranges where you could say, well, you know, I want to see things that were written internally, but I want the external reviewers to know that I'm not going to see their letters. You can conceivably come up with other options as well here. This is a choice you need to make before your file goes out for review. Okay? How do you make that choice? It's up to you. We can't pressure you on this. We can be factual and tell you about percentages of cases that go out where access has been fully waived, percentages where access has been retained, and so on. Those numbers aren't all that important. It's really up to you to decide this. Okay? Now, as a reviewer, you might have your opinions as to what sort of review you would write based on one of those circumstances or another. You can use your personal feelings to help guide you in making this decision, but we can't pressure you in one way or another. I think there was a question. Okay. All right. All right, I answered it. Okay. If you have any questions about this, feel free to talk to me or anybody else in academic affairs, and we'll try to make it clear. And if you're feeling unduly pressured to make one choice, by all means let us know and we'll have an appropriate conversation. The question is it harder to find reviewers if the waiver is not, if it's an open file, if you have to tell the reviewer the candidate may see your letter? I said I can tell you percentages. Most of the cases we see are access is fully waived. So I don't have that much experience in answering your question. So when I don't have broader experience, I resort to personal stories because I'd like to do that. For me personally, if I have a student ask me to write a letter of evaluation, I tell that student that I will not say anything that I wouldn't feel comfortable saying to your face. So for me personally, I'll write the same letter whether it's open or closed. I don't know if that's always the case. Anecdotally, I think we all imagine that reviewers would say, I don't want to write to an open file, or they might write differently to an open file. That might be the case, but it's really an individual matter, and I don't have statistics to support one or the other. The one key thing is when this decision happens. This only happened once in the 7 or 8 years I've been working with the P&T process, where a department didn't get the waiver status established before they wrote to the external reviewers. They used the form letter to the external reviewers that said the candidate had waived access to the file, and so they were writing confidentiality. And then the letters came in, and then the waiver was not signed. The candidate said, I want to retain access to my file. The department then got to write to each of the reviewers saying, we screwed up, and in fact, this is an open file. Would you like to rescind your letter or revise your letter or let it fly. And maybe this is a little bit of external information. In that particular case, all the reviewers said, it's fine, let it go. But again, that's a single case, so I'm not really going to generalize. We weren't very happy about having to make that additional contact with the reviewers. We never like to look like we make mistakes. And so we urge, well, we require, to the extent we can, that this waiver be established before the external reviews are sought. If it's an open file, you see the letters they wrote on their letterhead. Yes, you don't have to. I'll tell you, I've handled 300 or 400 cases, and only once has a successful candidate asked to see the file. So typically, it's only people who have been unsuccessful that then want to access the file. Though everybody can look at it if they want to. And if it's an open file, you will see everything. We're going to run out of time here, but these have been great questions, and in the end, I find the questions probably more valuable than things I thought would be valuable. But let me continue on. Your vita, include your full established career, including your teaching and service. As a chemist, I didn't put either of those things down. It was all about publications and who I worked with and where I spoke. And at some point, I said, I probably should, since I tell other people to do this, I should create a teaching and service part of my CV. CV got 3 times as long because I do too much service. But it's a full record of your career. That's why it's not a resume, it's a curriculum vitae. Okay. And your education, include your graduation dates and your mentors' names. I've seen lately a few cases where people leave their graduation dates off, and I have a feeling it relates to the fact that we're not allowed to ask people about how old they are, and the date you got your degree might reveal that in part. So I understand that, and I'm not sure how that would resolve in a discussion. But particularly important, we're trying to figure out how long you've been here mostly when we're looking at the dates. The mentors' names, really valuable, so we don't accidentally ask your mentor to be a reviewer for your tenure case. And they have to say, I'd be happy to do it, but you should know I was the mentor. And I said a few seconds ago, we don't like to look like we don't know things. And if we didn't know who you worked with, that feels like a pretty big omission. So tell us. And I've got way too much about the publications, but the key thing is distinguishing peer-reviewed publications, the industry standard, from things that appear through some other vehicle. If you have co-authors, list them all, unless you're in high energy physics, and there's 300 of them in every publication. And list them in the listed order. And if there's any question, and there's always question, almost always question in co-authored works, most fields seem to like to say things like, we appreciate co-authorship, and it's the norm in our field, but somehow it still confuses us. So don't let people be confused. If you're the last on the list of co-authors and everything, and you know that people are going to say, oh, well, first authorship is important, so we're concerned about the minor contribution, and your last name is Zizix, and in your field you publish alphabetically, or list alphabetically, tell them that in your statement, in your CV, find some way to make it clear who the primary author is. And if it's the first author, say so. If you list alphabetically and you put a star by the primary author's name like you do in my field, make that clear. But use your CV and your statement to make sure that people don't misinterpret anything. Answer any obvious questions you think they might have. Okay? And they're always going to have questions about who was the real person that did the work in a co-authorship situation. So don't leave them guessing. Tell them. Let me just move on from that. If you have things that are not yet in print, trajectory. Okay, so establish honestly. I've sometimes seen people say that something was in preparation, and what that meant was they were thinking, that's a paper I should write sometime. In preparation should mean it's substantially drafted. Okay, and there's various different fields have different things, but list honestly where your publication is at the time your CV is being submitted and dated. There's always a temptation, well, it was revise and resubmit, and I'm sure it's going to be accepted. Don't list it as accepted until you get that letter. You can always submit and update your CV And that's kind of cool. It shows how dynamic. Look, the stuff's still progressing along. So list honestly where the publication is. But do list them. If things are in the works, we want to know. We don't want to see that you had 17 papers leading up to tenure, but there's nothing left in the pipeline. That makes us worry about trajectory. Oh, well, if there's nothing under review, there's nothing. No, it's not critical, but just you're establishing what's going to happen next. Okay. Maybe I'm about to talk about a book. Your book just was published, and that was 5 years of work, and you've just started the new one. It's, I've got a working title and a chapter and a half drafted, or initial field research done. It's nowhere close to being under review. That's okay. Just establish where it's at. Speaking of the book, the university considers a book complete when it's done. I like to say it that way because it seems so obvious, but if there is a signed contract with a publisher and the manuscript is completed, the book's done. Okay. What do we mean by a completed manuscript? Well, we're open to maybe it hasn't gotten to the galley proof stage yet, so you're going to get galley proofs. Maybe it needs indexing. That's a little more substantial, but it's about indexing. But you're not going to rewrite the chapters other than copy editing or galley proofing. We consider that complete. Okay. If you say, well, it's all done, I just have to write the introduction, or there's just one chapter to go, or I'm working on the last chapter, then it's not done. And I try to be black and white about this to make it just totally clear. I'm not an untrusting person. I've already established that in some other areas, I think, like manuscript reviews. But if that last chapter is not done, how do I know it will ever be done? Or if it's completed but you don't have the signed contract yet, how do I know that there will ever be a signed contract? So we consider a book when it's done. Ideally, it's between covers, and we can hold a copy and smell the pages and flip through and really enjoy it. But it's not absolutely required that it be in final printed form for us to count it.
But can we say that, at least in arts and sciences, you'll require an email from the editor of the draft?
I'll establish later what we would need to establish this, but yes, you'll want to document the stage it's at for it to count. In red, to highlight work in progress. I've already talked about this a lot. I don't think I'll continue further, except to stress again, it's really important in us figuring out what happens next. We say, please stay here forever. We did that because we had some expectations. Not very interesting. The key here is when you're listing your accomplishments, list them in a way that will avoid having anybody who approaches your file from the level of a skeptic. And reviewers frequently come to their job as saying, I've got to look for the flaws. Make it hard for them to find flaws. If your publication list lists all together all your published works, whether they were reviewed or not, whether they were as a full book or an introduction to an edited volume or an invited two-pager in Time magazine or something else, it's easy for people to throw up their hands and say, I can't figure out which of these are really important and which aren't, and you don't want the reviewers to get to that place. So present your scholarship in a way that makes it easy for them to understand. Refereed works separate from unrefereed articles, for example. Dissertation, it was read very critically by your committee, but does it count as much as a book published as an assistant professor? Absolutely not. Is blind peer review important? Different fields do things differently. So yes, there are peer review processes differ wildly from one discipline to another. It's going to be whatever is the norm in your discipline, I think. Some people are very specific. They'll have it maybe in parentheses after each piece. It'll be blind, peer-reviewed, or non, or whatever it might have been. Chemistry, I don't know if we have any blind peer review, but it's just what is.
What about like invited reviews for a journal? Sometimes those aren't refereed, but that's actually kind of respect for the customers.
It's the question about things that are invited, whether they're reviewed or not, as a sign of respect. Absolutely, and it starts to suggest some pretty natural divisions of lists of publications, for example. So I have several invited book chapters. They're technically reviewed, but it's not the same rigorous process as a journal article. Speaking engagements, same sort of notion. If I'm an invited keynote speaker at an international conference, I want to make sure people see that and don't see the Rotary Club presentation that I gave the next week and think, oh, this is just a listing of random things, and I don't see very many important ones. Make it easy for them to find the distinguished things and separate the ones that maybe are less so. If you do a lot of guest lectures for your colleagues, that's a really important thing you do, and it speaks to your service as a colleague. It speaks to your ability to teach, or presumably they wouldn't ask you. You must be a good speaker, but it's probably more a service or teaching contribution than a research contribution, and you probably don't want to dilute those international conferences with your guest lectures in Sociology 257. Okay. Turn to the statement. Relatively short. My chemistry colleague just provided a 20-pager. Chemistry has a history of doing incredibly long candidate statements, and it's cultural, and I don't think there's anything we can do about it. It's who we are. But ideally, you want to spend maybe 5 to 6 pages, maybe roughly 3 or 4 on your scholarship, 1 or 2 on your teaching, and a little bit enough, but not aggressively too much about your service. You're balancing, and this is why chemistry has this trouble, I think, is they know we're going to send this statement to the external reviewers who are experts in our field. And I want to show them how important what I've done is. So I want to write a really detailed statement about all these seminal discoveries that I've made. And unfortunately, what I have to balance is that the same statement is going to go to the Dean's Advisory Committee, to the Faculty Personnel Committee, to the Dean, to the Provost, none of whom are going to be chemists. Because if there were a chemist in one of those faculty committees, they're going to recuse themselves from looking at the chemistry colleague's statement or dossier. So you want to help these people understand how important what you've done is without blowing them out of the water with the technical detail. I continue to cite a math candidate's example from a number of years ago now. Most were mathematicians. Do we have any in the audience? Okay, but they might be watching us. Still have to be careful. We have a lot of abstract theoretician, mathematician folks who do things that mere mortals can't understand and even use a language that we can't read. And it's just the way it is. I think people would say the same thing about organic chemists, like I am. This candidate wrote a statement that started with a page and a half saying, I'm going to try to explain to you in general terms what I do. Did such a great job of it that all of us reading this statement were pretty sure we understood, even though I'm pretty sure we didn't, but we thought we did. And then there was a little break, and it said, if you're not an abstract mathematician, you might want to stop reading now. And went into the detail. In sufficient length that the expert reviewers who knew this person from his publications as well, said this is a superb mathematician. And all the generalists reading this case said, this guy's a superb teacher because he made me think I understood what he's doing. And the research side, we got the word of the expert saying he's the best in the world. So the statement conveyed not only the research importance, but the ability of the candidate to teach. Is that a good strategy? I kind of think it is, because your statement is going to go to your expert reviewers. They're going to get your full scholarship portfolio, and they're going to recognize what the statement is. So if your statement is entirely at a more general level and you refer the experts to your publications, I think that's also a perfectly fine strategy. I will say it's not just me that was impressed by this person, and I periodically see reviewers, external reviewers, comment on the quality of the statement in conveying what this person does to a general audience. You want to talk about what you've done, what you're doing, and the magic word trajectory again, what you're planning to do in your statement. The external reviewers will always be looking for the expectations for the future. And if you don't list anything that you're planning to do, you're risking having reviewers say, you know, it's not bad, but we don't see where the candidate's going next. And we all recognize that's what a tenure decision is based on. Okay. We will also, and this is a new thing under the collective bargaining agreement, I think it's a terrific addition, ask you to include a statement about your contributions to equity and inclusion. I'm going to spend a few slides on this. Because I think it's important. I'll tell you first off, the Office of Equity and Inclusion has provided guidance online, and Sonia's sending around some additional information from Dan Hosang in that office that we think will be helpful to you. This is required. Also, this is not required, but there's a portfolio that you can provide to illustrate your contributions to equity and inclusion. This is one, it's a curiosity of the CBA. A CBA is a living document, and we'll start breathing new life into it starting in January in the new process. The CBA calls for this evidence of contributions to equity inclusion to be included in your primary file. The teaching portfolio, the service portfolio, the scholarship portfolio are all included in a separate document that we call the supplementary file. That's a little bit of a technical detail, but the difference is we send that back to you when the process is completed, and the primary file we keep until the earth or the sun fades into oblivion, basically. It's a permanent record. It's odd to have this particular portfolio included, and I suspect in the new CBA to be initiated, this will be placed somewhere else. But that's a technical detail. What this is would be materials that you would provide to support your engagement with notions of equity and inclusion. I do keep referring to CBA. We have faculty who are not members of the bargaining unit. Technically, at present, you don't need to pay attention to this. The university is very interested in having a single process for everybody. I'll tell you, whether or not I was in the CBA, I would include that because it's something I'm proud of. And it's people have questions about this. I have 3 more slides to talk about what this might look like. Maybe I'll do that and then see if there are additional questions. But so technically, if you're not in the bargaining unit, some of the details may look slightly different, but they're so slight that I would urge everybody to do it this way no matter what. The question is about timing of notification about this expectation, and is it fair to be judged on changed standards? You're touching on a number of things that I could probably turn into a very complicated conversation. I think what I'll simply say here is to say that this is a slight change, and really what it's looking for is reflection on the broader impacts of what one has done in either research, teaching, or service, or all 3 blended together. I deal with people who are upset with the process, and I'd be surprised if I couldn't talk with someone about this one-on-one and have them think that this was not something to be upset about. These next couple of slides come from Dan Hosang in the Office of Equity and Inclusion, and I thank Dan, who's not here today, for providing them. First, the CBA addresses this contribution. The next bits of information come from Office of Equity Inclusion, and they're designed to be helpful guidance. And I believe these documents were drafted with United Academics, and there's a general understanding that these are useful ways to think about this. First off, the question came out that I think that the CBA talks about institutional equity inclusion, and people said, well, maybe, I was doing something with the Eugene school system, but it wasn't with the University of Oregon, so is that institutional equity? We interpret institutional equity inclusion very broadly here, and basically something that you would do that would impact those elsewhere both reflects on us as an institution, increases the impact of this institution on those other places. It represents an issue of institutional equity inclusion, even if you're not working with a group at the University of Oregon. Okay. These contributions can show up in either your scholarship, teaching, or service. This isn't expected to be something else you do, an add-on, the fourth leg of the table that we're evaluating. Generally, these contributions are going to be ingrained in something that you're doing already. And here I've already said they're relevant whether it's at the UO or beyond. Dan notes these impacts could be at the individual level, at a higher programmatic level, or at an institutional level. And I'll leave that up just long enough that you can read the words that we've written there. And if you have questions about this, I'll take some questions now if they remain, but you should also feel free to contact the Center on Diversity and Community for a consultation. And Sonia just passed around a guidance document that perhaps will be helpful to you. So are there remaining questions about this at this point? Yes? Yeah, thank you. And for the viewers on the web, Gina pointed out or reiterated that this is an expectation, an opportunity for reflection about the contributions one has made in the course of scholarship, teaching, and or service, rather than an expected additional thing to do. It's a great question. If equity inclusion is basically what your scholarship is all about, how do you write a separate statement about it that doesn't either sound contrived or redundant? This calls for a statement. I could imagine a statement along the lines of fundamental issues of equity inclusion are central to everything I do. I live and breathe it. This is my research is in the area of blank. It's inexorably it's entwined. It's intimate. It's part of it, and I would think that would do the trick. It's clear and unambiguous, and ultimately, exactly, I think what we're anticipating is going to happen. I got to personalize again in this one. When I first saw this expectation, because everything's about me, I thought, what would I say? And sometimes we are too narrow, and that's why we've got these slides in here, and thinking about what we're doing. And I thought, well, I had an African American postdoc once. Does that count? And then what I stood back and thought, and that's this idea of reflection on what we do is key, I think. I said, in my area of green chemistry, my focus over the past 10 years has been developing new approaches to laboratory chemistry that will enable students to do laboratory chemistry no matter where they are or how little or how much they have. It's the whole purpose of what I do. And I had never really thought about it in this context, yet if I can be proud of myself, it's what better context, what other context would I put this in? Accessible education for everybody. That sounds important. That relates to inclusion just a little bit, like completely, I think. And so, but I kind of panicked when I first saw this expectation, because I had never really thought of my work in that context. We're giving everybody the chance to think about what they do, and I have a hunch that everybody will find, because we're all caring human beings who chose careers as academicians, it's in there. This helps us recognize what we're doing. As we call it out, I'll tell you that I'm planning to take advantage of what I learned from people's statements over the coming years to help. If we have faculty at the university, and I think we do, who are still a little unclear about what we mean by this, it reminds me what happened years ago at the NSF when we went from 4 review criteria to 2, and the second one was the broader impacts of your research. And everybody panicked, thinking, oh, they're telling us we have to be applied scientists now, and the NSF's fundamental research. This is, they were in an uproar, but they really just didn't understand. And we started holding workshops to illustrate what a broader impact might look like and help people recognize what the broader impacts of their own work were. Well, we have some need, I think, here at the university of doing exactly the same thing, helping people recognize what equity inclusion looks like, helping them connect what they've been doing, either in the way mine connected in a very natural way to issues of equity inclusion, or maybe to help them seek out ways to make an impact beyond their own confines. Yeah, I'm trying to think how to summarize that question, but issues, how do you discuss this without maybe revealing confidential student information and so on? I'd maybe take a step away from the specifics and think in more general terms about how to describe the impacts of what I'm doing. Yes? There's the question is, if this isn't one of the pieces that is I talked about research, teaching, and service, how does this fit into the evaluation? It's a really good question, and I think it's going to have to be an ongoing conversation. This year, we're providing guidance to review committees about, that looks very much like the guidance I provided you here today about what these statements might look like. In the end, what if a candidate puts forth a case for promotion and it doesn't have a statement about contributions to equity inclusion? Are we prepared to deny tenure in that case? Certainly in this transition year, I would say the answer is no. In the longer run, I think we're going to need to have conversations about what it means. They're going to sound very much like the conversations about service. In the end of the day, if you're the tenure cases I distinguish from the promotions to full professor, we have a little more opportunity, I would say, in the full professor cases, because if you want to say, look, we have expectations for service, we have expectations for this sort of engagement, and you haven't fulfilled them, you're going to have to try harder. For a tenure decision, we're saying you're going to have to try harder somewhere else. And so it's a harder thing to be so black and white about. But yet, if we're serious about this, we're going to have to figure out exactly what we mean by it and how we evaluate it. But fortunately, we're in a transition year. I don't need a hard and fast answer this year. All right, let me soldier on here. We're running a little bit late on time. The statement, I've already said, should focus significantly on research and teaching, less so on service. This call-out statement on equity and inclusion, addressing this, one of the earlier comments, I think your comment, I could see that's so folded into my research, teaching, and service that statement would basically say, look, read the rest of my statement. Here it is. It's everywhere. I do think using the statement to help people understand something that's difficult to understand is important. I've already addressed this. Don't let reviewers have questions that are important to them. Answer them for them. So if you're the last author and everything, talk about that. I'm going to delete this high energy physics thing. They typically have 300 or 400 authors on publications. That's why I always call them out. Explain it. If you had a gap, there were 3 years where you didn't publish anything, somebody's going to wonder what was going on. They're looking for trajectory. I'm not sure what just happened there. Just still? Yeah, okay. They're looking for trajectory and they've got a bumpy road. They're not sure what's going to happen next. Maybe you started a new research area. That would be a good explanation. Maybe you finished a book and you were doing field research for the next one. Understandable. Maybe you were in clinical depression and it's none of their business. So this in the end is something of a personal matter. Recognize that reviewers are looking at the publication or scholarship record and they're looking for gaps. And if there's a gap, they'll probably have a question. And you can decide for yourself if you want to explain it or if it's really none of their business. Okay. It has become their business in part because we've asked them to review, but there are things you don't have to tell people, and that's fine. You should, okay, I think I'd just leave it at that.
Can I just add one thing?
Please.
For both the CV and the personal statement, every time you submit them or any additions, make sure you sign and date. Otherwise, we have to send it back to you.
Right. Judith's reiterating, whenever you send something, sign and date it. And she's my quality control agent. If a file is missing something, it's very likely that Judith will catch it before I ever see it, and I appreciate that. But yes, updates always available to you, signed and dated. Yes? Yeah, credit for prior service. I've got let me push on quickly, and I think I'll get to that, but and see if I answer it for you. Okay. Teaching, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. You'll list the students you supervise. We already talked about some of this. I was going to delete that. In fact, I did, but it was on a version that we didn't save here, so it showed up. It's always just too confusing to explain. The teaching portfolio, we talked about the portfolio already, so I'm going to make up some time here. Most of the teaching responsibility beyond the portfolio is your department head's responsibility. You shouldn't have to put together all this stuff, including the teacher evaluations. You have them, but the department head needs to put those together for you, and they will. So they'll have a list of the courses he taught, the summary of the quantitative evaluations, comparisons to departments, list of teaching awards. We say the department should provide that, but you probably know that better than they do. So if you have some, make sure your department knows, like from your CV. The sample, the evaluation form, the quantitative summaries, copies of all signed qualitative comments. You get all the student comments, signed or unsigned. When your department accesses your teaching records, they only get the ones the students have signed. Okay? And those are the only ones any reviewers can refer to. Only you get the unsigned ones and decide for yourself if they said something important or not. Peer evaluations, if you're pre-tenure, you're supposed to get peer evaluation in the 3 years leading up to the tenure year. That would mean this year, last year, and the year before, because next year is the tenure year. Well, what if your department forgot to do that? It's a little late to do it last year or the year before. Okay. It's supposed to be the department's responsibility to get these done. You're aware of this now, kind of late for you, but if you haven't had 3 peer evaluations done by the end of this year, talk to your department head before that. Make sure your department head knows that you need another peer evaluation or 2. They can happen next year as well, but it's not really, when we know we're supposed to have 3 from the previous 3 years and we get a file that's got 2 from fall term of next year, people aren't very happy about that. Again, it won't derail a case. It's another one of these things where we say, okay, how do we deal with this if it's not done? But make sure your department head knows that you need to be evaluated. The service portfolio, here I referred to it. You'll have these slides online, or if you just remember academicaffairs.uoregon.edu, that'll get you to a page where you can click on implementation resources, somewhere around here. There are documents available online talking in more detail about what the service portfolio would look like. But again, as I suggested earlier, this is, for me at least, the portfolio is the stuff that I've received acknowledging the various service contributions that I've made. You can provide a short narrative in the portfolio discussing your service if you'd like to. That's not required. And I want to race through some of this. The department's going to send or put these things into the file, as we've already talked in various forms. Department head writes an independent report. I mentioned that. If there are things that I've suggested that you should cover in your statement that you didn't, then we ask the department head to take care of that. If you forgot to talk about author order and it's an issue, the department head ought to talk about author order. Okay. Timing of issues, or this could relate to things like credit for prior service that I'm still getting to. I haven't forgotten yet. And so on, makes an independent recommendation that may or may not be consistent with the tenor of the department's vote. It most often is, but it doesn't have to be. Letters from students. Just relates not completely to the question that was asked earlier. If you get letters from students saying, really appreciate your teaching, I think that goes in your teaching portfolio. Should student letters be recruited to a promotion and tenure case? I'll tell you that certainly campaigns to get 50 or 100 letters from students aren't particularly convincing to reviewers. And overall, I'd say that letters from students about a promotion or tenure case are not often very convincing or useful to reviewers, in large part because the student's familiar with you in one particular setting, perhaps as a research mentor or as a teacher in a class. And tenure and promotion are about a much bigger spectrum of events than just that one event. And so it's uncommon for a student to really be tuned into what a tenure decision means. That said, if students provide letters, they are included in the dossier and they're read by the reviewers. Okay, at last, I'm getting to the question about credit for prior service. If you're hired new assistant professor, many of you might have been, you're in your 5th year at the University of Oregon. By the end of your 6th year will be the tenure decision. That's the normal timing. It doesn't preclude you from coming up early. One of my colleagues is being considered a year early for tenure. He's awesome, in my opinion and my personal read of his file. He has published so much. He's gotten so many $1 million of grants. He's spoken. I don't know how he can travel so much. He reviewed, I mentioned him, 125 manuscripts. He's just nailed it so superbly that he's not just making it. It's roaring past the expectations. And why not promote earlier? Why would we wait? Okay. That's sort of what we're looking at for an early versus an on-time decision. It doesn't mean an on-time decision is shameful. It's normal, and normal in a place of excellence is excellent. Okay. Sometimes we promote people early. How do we know if that's early? If they came in, let me jump down to the bottom here, with credit for prior service. So you had 2 years of, well, it doesn't matter how many years of credit. Maybe you come in with 3 years of credit for prior service. The tenure review process starts in the winter of your 5th year, so in the middle of your 2nd year here, the process could start, and that would be considered an on-time review. If it started earlier than that, it would be early. What if you didn't want to use all those 3 years? You delayed a year. Still considered on time. So if you have credit for prior service, your contract looks different from someone who started fresh here. It'll have the year in which tenure may be considered, and implicit in the statement it means and considered an on time, and then it will have a second date, June 15th of 2000 whatever, at which a tenure decision is required. That date is 6 years out from when you were hired at the University of Oregon. So if you come with credit for prior service, you can use all of it or some of it or none of it, and you're still considered an on-time evaluation. Yes? That's the middle part here. If you take parental leave or a leave without pay, and you arrange at the time, you say, I want to delay my tenure clock. It stops the clock for a year because we work in 1 year increments. And then another year down the road, you say, you know what? Things went fine. I don't want to wait a year. You don't have to use that credit for leave, and you're still considered on time. So that's, I guess it should say that here. You can come up as originally scheduled and still be considered on time. If you use all of your credit, then we look at the past. The bottom line is we look at a roughly 5 to 6 year period leading up to tenure. If you didn't have credit, then that 5.5 to 6 year period, I'm being fuzzy because you start creating your document in the middle of your 5th year, decision's not completed to the end of the 6th year. We're going to look at your stuff from the University of Oregon. If you use all the credit for prior service, if you didn't have any credit, everything's at U of O. If you use all your credit for prior service, we'll look at your time at U of O plus the time that was allotted for that credit. And the biggest question comes, what if say we granted you 3 years of credit and you only used 1 year of it? What do we look at? Well, the longer you're here, the more we can look at what you did while you were here. And loosely speaking, I keep doing this because the spacing between my two hands is a 6 year period, and we slide it along. So the 6 years leading up to your tenure decision, in general, is what we're going to look at. And if that leaves you with questions, talk to me about your individual circumstance, because everybody's going to be different, and we'll do our best to have you understand clearly how that works. But I think that's a simple way to look, is that roughly there's a 6 year window we're looking at. Whether it was all at U of O or part at U of O or somewhere else is going to depend on what credit you had. Did I already talked about the book? I'm going to add just one little piece to this, and that is things can happen very late. It's better if they don't. You know, if you're in a field where having the book is kind of the currency for a positive tenure decision, you've known that for a long time, get her done. Okay. In the 11th hour, maybe your file's gone through the department, maybe through the deans, and you're still feverishly revising the manuscript. And before the provost makes a decision, you get the final word from the publisher. Your manuscript is now complete, no further changes. It'll be published June 17th, whatever it might be. You can provide that letter to the file, to send it to me in academic affairs. We'll get it to the provost, and that could change things. Frequently in a case like that, earlier reviewers and committees might have said, you know, it's a strong case, the teaching's strong, good service, but the book's not done. If the book were done, we would enthusiastically support a tenure case, but we can't. Well, now the book's done. That's what I mean by 11th hour. So that the provost could find this convincing. The provost could also say, too little, too late. Trajectory is what we're looking at, right? And this trajectory was too flat, too late. You know, the provost makes a decision, and it's an academic judgment. But so try to avoid that. But in the end, if new things happen that are clearly central to your case, until the provost has decided, he hasn't decided. So you should get the information, or she, sorry, now, yes. Okay. We already talked about that. Let me focus just briefly now for our one candidate promotion to full professor. Start with the book status. If you're looking at promotion to full professor and your book's not done yet, and you're hoping to have that final contract, that final acceptance before May 1st decision, you know, realistically, that you're not forced to go through the review for promotion to full professor. And then my recommendation in a case like that is that you just wait. Another year, the provost can look at the published book. It'll be impressive, more so than I just barely got it done in time. And make it easy, because you're not required to be reviewed. Other details, things that are looked at: when you were last promoted, really it's trajectory, right? The words haven't changed. What we want to see is have we turned you into a total type A individual that will continue to work too hard for the rest of your career here? If so, then great, we're ready to do this. And we've talked about the qualitative nature, the service contributions and what they might look like and so on already, so I don't think I'll repeat those here. One key thing, if a publication led to your tenure and promotion, however many years ago that might have been, we already used that information, okay? So it's going to be the material that has appeared since then that is important. Sometimes, what if we talked about trajectory, your tenure case, well, you had 17 papers, fewer, 4 papers published, 2 that were in press, and 1 in preparation. Well, after your tenure case, the 2 that were in press come out, and the 1 that was in preparation is finished. Are we double counting those? Sort of, and sometimes people will make it clear in their CV which, draw a line at which point tenure was considered and what publications happened after that. But ideally, you've become type A, you're publishing prolifically, and worrying about the status of 1 or 2 publications really doesn't matter at that point. All right, at last, with a whole 5 minutes to spare. This is me again. I'm happy to talk with you or write to you to respond to any questions. Feel absolutely free to contact me. Here's our Academic Affairs website. And this I mentioned. If you go to that website, there's a promotion and tenure tab that you can click. We're in the process of completely revising this in light of CBA and new developments. You will find there, among other things, a set of guidance documents that I've prepared primarily for department heads, but in the end I want to stick them together into a single resource that everybody can look at. You will, I think, enjoy seeing those as well. The questions about selection of external reviewers, I wrote 5 pages about how to choose external reviewers, so you can read more about that there. And then if you find on the home page, the collective bargaining section, there's a link for implementation resources that will get you more information about the equity inclusion statement and portfolio, about the service portfolio, and about lots of other things. So, sorry I went on awfully long. I'm happy to take more questions now or informally afterward. Please take more food as you leave. And again, please feel free to contact me anytime.